So I want to say Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking the respected leadership of Dubai and the RTA. I want to thank them. I think being the last session, it's appropriate that we congratulate them as well on a really amazing landmark forum. So it's a privilege for me to be here and certainly be here in the last session. It's really an interesting place for me to be because I think Layla did such a nice job explaining most of my presentation, and Munir finished off what I was planning on presenting. So what I'll try to do is culminate some of the thoughts. Every PM, I think every good PM has a success criteria established. So for myself, I don't think I should extract myself from that. So what this presentation presented, and they serve value through the course of the last 3 days. There's even better statistics online that you can take and understand and digest. The success criteria that I will establish for myself is that if you can leave with one question or two questions that you go back to your organizations, I think Layla and Munir already have provided you some really good fodder to go back and stimulate some discussion, challenge some discussion. What you will see in some of my slides is that I'm really provoking questions. We should ask, there's a lot of terminology that's being discussed in project management. As Munir rightfully said, project management is really in its nascent stages, right? We're very early as a discipline. And when we are speaking in terms that are very foreign and in a language that perhaps our organizational culture, as you alluded to, do not understand, it's very easy to shun it away, right? I don't understand what you're saying to me, so I don't want to understand it. I don't want to talk to you because you're not speaking in my language. Maybe I just share with you one anecdote. You know, I've been to Dubai. I've had the privilege of being to Dubai almost nearly 10 times over the course of the last 10 to 12 years. And it's always been such a pleasure to go through the airport, right? I travel quite a bit for my role. And in Dubai, when I land, I'm not anxious because I know that the process will be very pleasant to me. My experience will be pleasant. But the end result, what are we trying to accomplish? If I land in JFK, if I land in Newark, which is my home airport, if I land in Dubai airport, you must go through immigration, right? Have your passport stamped. The next milestone is you must go through customs control, right? Take your luggage out. Those are the 2 checkpoints. It's a project. Every time I land, it's a project. What Dubai has done very interestingly, and I'll compare it to my home airport, Newark, where I've witnessed on more than one occasion many people are landing. It's an international airport, and they're being screamed at in English, right? Go that way, go that way. Most of these people don't understand the language of English. They're coming to America for the first time, or maybe they are coming numerous occasions, but they just don't speak the language. In Dubai, I noticed it wasn't just English, it wasn't just Arabic, it was many different languages. Everyone was being spoken to in a courteous manner so that the experience of getting through milestone 1 and milestone 2 was ease and pleasant. And this is what we need to, I just want to lay that foundation that, one, please understand the concept of simplification. Speak in the language that your organization understands. Customize it to your organization. So with all due respect to all the terms that have been created, and rightfully so that I use in my day-to-day job, OPM3, portfolio management, all of this, it can be very overwhelming for an organization and in fact cause organizational anxiety if they do not understand in basic terms, and you build up the building blocks to help them understand what it is that we're trying to provide them from a value perspective. So I just wanted to start with that. So let's ask the question. I'm not going to go through the first. There's many definitions. I've pulled the first definition off of Wikipedia, right, which is, what is a PMO? It's an organization, it's a group of people that defines and maintains. I highlighted both words because it's also to create, define, and maintain within an organization. I do agree with Munir that it can be more than one PMO that exists in an organization. The importance there, and this is one of the maybe tidbits that I'll leave with you, ensure that the hub and spoke model is used. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. So you have however number of many PMOs you have in your organization, make sure there's one that's central, that is accomplishing that, and all the other ones are linked, and you have a defined process of how that is accomplished. Do not expect it to happen organically. So that's just one piece that I'd like to leave there. As I started with, I want you to go back and challenge some of the words that are being used. Success, right? How are you terming the word success? How is your PMO successful? What does success mean? So I think it's incumbent on me to also challenge the definition of my presentation, which is, what does essence mean, right? So there's two words that come to mind. One is that it's intrinsic, and the other that it's indispensable. Right? So intrinsic goes back to the theme that was from the first two speakers. It is inherent to your organization. How do you weave it into the fabric of the organizational culture? It cannot be extracted, so you cannot expect a PMO to be created and then somehow imagine that linkages will be formed. So the how of doing that is very difficult for me to say, because each organizational culture, I don't think anyone can sit here and say, oh, you must do this. Yes, you must do it. If I'm sitting there, if I was in your seat, I would say, well, how do I do this, right? And the answer is that it's unique to your culture. That's why I have the box of the organizational culture and strategy up there. As the previous speakers explained, you must link yourself into one strategic pillar. It doesn't have to be all of them. Link yourself into one of the strategic pillars. All of our organizations must have some strategic agenda. We're working on ours for 2015. So you link yourself to one of them, and then you are also very cognizant of the culture that exists in your organization. Munir spoke about the culture. So you need to work on, my organization is different than yours, is different than Leila's, is different than any of the organizations sitting here. Right? So I cannot sit here and say, well, what did I have to do to make sure that I have a seat at the executive committee level, to Munir's point, right? So as chief project officer, I'm sitting right next to the chief financial officer. I'm sitting right next to the chief marketing officer. That was a struggle and a fight, but it was done in the context of the culture that exists in my organization. So one of the tidbits that I leave for you from this slide is be extremely cognizant that my organizational culture is unique, and within that context, within the nuances of the culture that exists, I must ensure that I am intrinsic, indispensable from that culture. Weave yourself into the culture. And then just at the end, you need to understand what the derived value is, right? So the derived value, and I'll just move to the next slide. We're, on the top box, we're actually conducting a study which we just started. So I kind of leveled the boxes, the bubbles that you see in the top, efficiency, value, savings, and differentiator, on some of the preliminary results that we've received from our clients that we're working with. These are Fortune 100 companies. So when we ask them, what is the impetus for establishing, what is your purpose for establishing a PMO? Again, these words are thrown out: efficiency, savings, differentiator, value. The phase that we're in right now is to say, well, what does that mean? You know, what are you trying to be efficient with? That's a very nice word, but I'd like to unearth that. I'd like to understand what that means in the context of your organization. What does value mean? Value is a very nice word. Unfortunately and respectfully, I think it's overused. I want my PMO to provide value. Well, I don't think anyone would go and say and challenge and say, well, I don't want my PMO to provide value, right? That would never be said. But what does that value mean, and how do you translate that into tangible items that can be understood by your organization? In the bottom, I think it's an interesting question that I won't spend too much time on, but I'd like you to all leave with this one question. As you're going back to your homes, as you're traveling back home, what would happen if my PMO did not exist? Reverse the question. Instead of saying, why should my PMO exist? It's maybe a bit provocative, but maybe more interesting to absolutely understand the certainty of the benefit and the value derived from a PMO, to reverse the question and say, if my PMO didn't exist, and then any of the answers that you get, challenge them even further, right? Well, if my PMO didn't exist, I wouldn't have reporting, right? So as I was undertaking the activity and the case to go to my senior management to say, this is why we need to embed ourselves in the executive committee and the board, I had to go through this stepwise process, and very challenging and difficult process to say, okay, well, if my PMO didn't exist, we wouldn't have reporting. And then I challenged myself, and I said, well, you could have other people in each of the individual disciplines do reporting. So what, right? So each of those questions that you ask within, create yourself a list, and then challenge each of those questions until you get to the essence, right, of what that value is within the context of your organization. It's a very important, and I think an interesting question, even if you have an established PMO, to ask yourself and be introspective for some time. I spoke about translation, right? So if we have some foundational pillars, and I've gone outside of the discipline of project management for this slide. So perhaps some of you are familiar with a strategic model called VUCA, right? So that's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The acronym is VUCA. You can look it up online and understand more about it. But I thought it's interesting, again, in the concept and the theme of working within an organizational culture. Munir spoke about organizational culture. Make sure that your PMO is embedded into that. Well, if I'm speaking in my language of project management, how am I going to explain to them in their management of organizational culture, strategy culture? I must try to speak to them in their language. So I've lifted one of these strategic tools, which is VUCA, and converted it into how project management can serve in a function, right? So between volatility and uncertainty, what does a PM function do? It stabilizes. And then you translate that even further into the tangible items that I was speaking about to say, okay, how do we stabilize? We conduct risk management and we conduct change management, which Leila alluded to. Change management, I don't think I'll have the time to really focus on that, but that is a critical function from my perspective with project management. You really cannot extract change management from project management. What is the impact of my actions, both positive and negative? Right? How am I impactful, and what actions have I taken that are non-impactful? So again, if you're taking some thoughts away from this, that's critical. If we move down to the bottom between uncertainty and ambiguity, what does a PM do? It clarifies, right? How do you clarify? You have stakeholder management and communication management. I just focus a couple of minutes on stakeholder management because the previous speaker spoke about stakeholder management. We've heard about it throughout the course of the last 3 days. Stakeholders, one, I think what I heard in one of the presentations yesterday is make sure you communicate to your stakeholders. I would respectfully suggest that perhaps you understand who your stakeholders are first. Right? So take a huge step back, even with established PMOs. Who are your stakeholders? And then understand the lines of communication of how you want to and what you want to communicate to them. So if I just take an example, if I'm sitting in the executive committee, what I want to hear from my PMO is vastly different than if I'm sitting on the project team or if I'm sitting in the vendor seat. Vastly different. So understand that, and what a tool that we've used, and this is another kind of concept that I'll leave with you if you want to write it down, is we've used the concept of persona profiles and segmentation. Right, so we've used the concept of segmentation. There's plenty of material online about segmentation and persona profiles. A marketing tool, a communication tool that I've leveraged into project management. And the benefit of this is that you take your different segments and you say, here are the characteristics for my different segments. Don't think of that from a stakeholder perspective. So don't make your segments into executive committee and project team members and vendors. Instead say, I have segment A, segment B, segment C. Segment A will be interested in high-level reporting, return on investment, value derived, those kinds of things. Maybe segment B is more interested in delays in reporting, how far are you off budget, more tactical issues, right? So create your personas. So persona A may be John, persona B may be Hazem, right? And you create these profiles. The benefit of this, as compared to just reporting from a stakeholder perspective, is that then you have the ability to say, you know what, in my stakeholder group C, I have some people who are persona profile A, and I have some people that are persona profile B. I have an ability to communicate to both of them. So even within a stakeholder group, you're not just communicating to one section, you're communicating and you're meeting the needs that they require. Again, thinking about it from the participant experience. Am I sitting in a stakeholder seat? I will be fueled and energized with what project management is providing me if I see the derived value, if you're telling me what I want to hear and what is value to me. If you're not, then I'm again going to try to shun this concept because I'm not seeing the derived value. Maybe others are, I'm not personally. So you don't get that energy, you don't get that excitement through the organization, and you don't infuse it in the organization. On the left-hand side, you have ambiguity and complexity, and there, maybe a simple term, you want to simplify. How do you do that? You create standards, you create tools and processes, right? And this was referred to by the previous speaker, and I couldn't agree more, right? There's a talent component, but then there's the standards and processes component. In the center, what I've put is exemplify. I think the best weapon that we have in this room is to, day in day, through our behavior as project managers, exemplify and infuse the culture of project management through the organization, not just through your PMO. So through our daily actions, we have the ability and the power, if we want to speak about power, to show the organization, chip away day-on-day basis of this is the value we're providing as true project managers. I won't focus on this slide too much. I'm just trying to go through the concept of how do you build a PMO. One of the things that I want to speak about here is under guiding principles. The rest of it you can read. Two things. Understand the context of your organization, both external factors and internal factors, right? So what my organization is today was not what it was yesterday. The needs of my organization today are not what they were yesterday. So always be cognizant of that as you communicate to the organization to continually defend the value that the PMO is providing. Do not be comfortable on your laurels to say, you know what, I had my case done a year ago. It still stands today. Always continually challenge yourself to say, is it correct? Is it value add for the context of the organization today? The other word that I want to focus on is empower. So when I say the word empower, if I could just look into the audience, just scream it out. What does the term empower mean to you? I'll just look at you. The word empower. Giving strength. Okay, someone from on this side? Sorry. Delegate responsibility. So to empower is to delegate responsibility, okay? I heard another. Authority and control. I'm sorry? Decision making. Okay. So if I heard some interesting and almost contrary words. So I hear delegate and then I hear control. So you said delegate. Right? That gentleman, who said control? Okay, so why don't you speak to him? Why do you think a PMO should control? What should they control?
I think if we have standardized processes, that will control how we deliver our products and services. So therefore you control whatever you want.
And who is giving you that control?
The standards that we created in the PMO office.
The PMO office is giving you the control. Yes. Okay. And could we give the mic to the delegate person?
Your question was how to empower?
What does empower mean?
Empower someone else, or a group, or a team, a project team. One of the things, and I think it's very important, is to delegate responsibility and hold them accountable for it.
Okay.
This is how you empower.
Hold them accountable. Okay. So maybe both of you are saying the same thing. Let me ask you a question. Let me just ask you one more follow-up question. Same question. Who delegates that authority? Who's delegating it?
If we're talking here about PMO, PMO being the entity or the group of people that define the standards and maintains them of project management in an organization, this means that they are the authority that can give power and take power. When you say empower, it means you have to give other people responsibility.
Okay, that's good. Where I was driving, and thank you both for speaking up in your comments, and I think it, again, unearths the concept. I want us to challenge the words. We often hear the PMO is empowered. Again, I would reverse it and say, well, I would never stand up here, or I would never stand in front of my board, I would never stand in front of my PMO and say, our PMO is not empowered. Everyone will say that their PMO is empowered. My questions are, and these are your questions that I think you should go back to your organization and say, who is empowering your PMO? Right? Is it leadership? Okay, if it is leadership that has empowered your PMO, what is the span of control? Right? I have the word span of control there. Maybe that's a word that you write down. So are you empowered to create ancillary budget? Are you empowered to communicate? Are you empowered to remove roadblocks and risk? What is that span of control? One, and who has given it to you? The third one, and perhaps the more interesting one for me, is the organizational acceptance. So I just moved to, I'll go back to the other two slides, but I want to use this slide because we're on the concept. This is, in my own way of communicating, a PMO value chain, or a PMO. The previous speakers had their own diagrams. Concept one, anchor yourself into organizational strategy, right? Make sure that you have linked yourself into something. Concept two, I have PMO A, PMO B, PMO C listed. As the previous speaker said, there are many different types of PMO. I'd be remiss if I stood here and said, this is the PMO that's right for you. You need to understand within the context of where you stand in your organization, the external factors, the internal factors, the culture, your organizational climate. So I put PMO A, PMO B, PMO C, so you determine where you land. But where you land will determine how much you stand on the continuum of tactical to governance, right? The point that I want to communicate in this slide is that even if someone stood here and said, my PMO is empowered by my leadership, I can stand here and say, I report into my CEO and they have empowered me to run the PMO. That's fine. What I would ask myself is, how has my organization accepted this? It's one thing to say, Munir, to your point, I'm going to pick on you. Munir rightfully said, if you have a finance department, it's the same phrase that I was going to say. If you have a finance department, HR department, why do you not have a PM department, right? The counter to that, what I would say to myself, is that's fine. You know, there are many times that you do have a project management department, but either one, they're not empowered from leadership, but I think in most cases, even with empowerment from leadership, the organization has not accepted it. There's no organizational acceptance for the value of PM. So we need to focus on that aspect of it as well. So the organizational acceptance and the leadership support continuum, which will ensure that you fuel the activities that you're putting into the organization. If the organization, the leadership accepts it, great. If the masses do not understand, one, what you're doing, or two, do not accept it, then you are spending more effort on your PMO than it's worth. Then I would ask the question again, what if my PMO did not exist? Would I have more money in my pocket? Would I have less stress? Right? You have to ask those questions and then determine what the corrective measures are. So if I just go back to this slide, the point here, the takeaway message here is that one size does not fit all. But what you can use this tool as a mechanism to say is that my span of control, my decision-making rights, my risk mitigation authority, as they increase, I move more towards a governance model, enterprise PMO, if you will. I don't want to fixate, I think the other takeaway message would be, I don't want to fixate on terms, right? So whether we call it a project management office or whatever term you want to give it, to me, personally, that makes no difference. It's much more interesting to sit here and say, what is the need of my organization from a project perspective? And let me reverse engineer that into whatever group I want to call it so that it provides value. Call it program management office. Do not get hung up on the terms. Use a term that is comfortable for your organization and is in the language of your organization. And on this matrix approach with the continuum of tactical to governance, very simplistic approach, perhaps you want to be in the right upper quadrant. What you can use this tool to do as well is say, hey, I want to be in the right upper quadrant, but in fact the reality is I'm in the lower left quadrant. So there is a mismatch between perception and reality. How do I close that gap? Oftentimes I've been experienced to be working in a project management office that we felt like we were up in the right-hand corner, but in fact in our organizational environment, in our organizational ecosystem, we were actually sitting in the lower left. Spinning wheels, expending resources, not providing value. So use this as a tool for your organization. Maybe you take this back home and you say, you know, on this matrix, very simplistic, this is where my dot lands. This is where my dot, I think, is from a perception standpoint in my organization. How do I bridge the gap? Just another way to look at it, I've used the terms, I'll spend 5 seconds on the slide, I've used the terms that Leila explained from PMI on the left, from a type perspective. On the right, I've just used a style perspective. Again, find where you land on this matrix. There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer. The take from me, the challenge from me to you is both on this previous slide and on this slide, find where you think your PMO lands and determine where you think the reality of the organization lands you. You might find, if you don't find a difference, wonderful, you're where you should be. If you find a difference, you're not providing the value and you're expending resources. The challenge then is to say, how do I bridge this gap? The piece that I didn't focus on here is that the talent component. I just want to pull out the word talent here. There's been a lot of discussion about talent, both in this session and previous sessions. I'll ask a question of all of you. How do you incent your project management talent to bring bad news to you? Part of a project manager's job sometimes it's not always a good news story, right? We're not good storytellers. Part of our job, if we're doing it correctly, is to say, here's what's going wrong, and I need help, or here's how we're going to fix it. How do you incent the youngest project manager on your team to say, you know what, your job actually is to come to me with bad news, even if you are the cause of it, and you're safe? How do you do that? Trust? Communication? Anything on this side? How do you do that? I'm actually asking because I'm trying to figure it out myself. Sorry?
Demonstrate the benefit of the guidance. This is not working.
It's working.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Demonstrate the benefits the PMO can, the guidance, the guidance the PMO can provide to junior project.
Right. You know, I come from a healthcare background, and the best antiseptic is to expose something to sunlight, right? Or expose something, unearth it quickly. You show it, whatever it is, from a medical perspective, you find it quickly, and you expose it to its treatment, right? Whether it's sunlight, whatever the antiseptic is. This is what we should be teaching and coaching our project management. This is the culture within our ecosystem that we create, right? But that means buy-in from your organizational culture. It's very naive for me to say, oh, make sure you go home and you do that, right? But this is in the context of so many things, cutting across the HR department in your organization. But this is the thought that I'd like to stimulate within your organizations to say, how do we create a safe environment for our PMs to unearth issues and actually incent them? How do you incent your talent to unearth issues and bring them to you so that they're resolved quickly? In the limited time that I have, I've taken another tool from outside of the project management discipline. So this is, on the left side, for those of you that are familiar with Lean and Six Sigma, one of the values that any PMO inherently can provide, these are not really tactical things, but I think embedded into the concept of the PMO that you've established. And these are not heavy, right? They can be incorporated into your day-to-day activities if you work them into your process, if you work them into your culture. On the left side, you have the activities that you want to either eliminate or reduce, right? The output is efficiency and effectiveness. We spoke earlier that some of the organizations I'm working with are saying, hey, I want to be efficient through my PMO. Well, here's a mechanism, right? You can start asking the questions in your day-to-day activities even. As you go home, you can ask these questions. What are the activities, tool, processes that we need to eliminate? What are the ones that perhaps we need to reduce? On the right-hand side, we have it more from a Six Sigma perspective, which is around quality. Which are the ones that we raise and we bring outside of our PMO and even move them into other disciplines? And which are the ones that we need to create? So again, a tool that's very widely used in strategy and organizational management. Why do we not, again, leverage such tools into the project management discipline so we're communicating with our peers one-to-one? Just as I'm summarizing and concluding the presentation, just a visual maybe to bring everything to fruition, which is work within the bounds of the organizational culture. I think we've all emphasized that. I feel very passionate about that. Ensure that you link yourself to strategy, create standards, tools, and processes, and then link them to the organizational need. Right? To force yourself onto an organization for a need that perhaps does not exist or you're not servicing the need, that's bound for failure. Once you have your organizational need, you plot yourself and determine what type of PMO you want to be. You worry about the talent, you ensure that you have the correct competencies. If you're more of a tactical PMO, again, going back to Leila's presentation, if we weave this together, you find someone with the subject matter expertise to help you. If you're more into the governance PMO, you want to bring in your strategic PMO leader. Process and tools, and then the PMO is established. Make sure, let me just go back, and I think I have a couple of minutes. For process and tools, one of the things that I have often found as a gap is we do a very nice job of lessons learned, right, in an organization. We have very nice tools for that, we have very nice templates for that, but where do they go after the lesson learned is complete? Right, where do they go? Are they just left in the PMO? Are we reaping them back into the organization? There is a benefit here for us and a value that we can provide to the organization if the organization will allow us to reap the lessons learned back into the organization, in fact, in some mechanism. To say, here's what we've learned through our PMO over the course of time, over the course of a project, however, whatever cadence you want to use. But here are 2 or 3 things. Don't make it heavy. Don't give them the big chart. Here are 2 or 3 things that we have learned from a value perspective in our PMO. Here's how the organization can benefit from them. Fuel the cycle of organizational integration, right? It's a great tool. So here, I was just trying to make a visual that there's some variable components to PMO, there's some static components, but in fact, the static and variable, when it comes to PMO, are blended together, right? So success and measurement, how are you valuing success and measurement? I focus 2 minutes on that. We can use the standard tools of budget, on time, quality, but it's interesting, and maybe one of the questions you go back and ask your organizations is, how do I demonstrate success from non-traditional PM measures, right? How have I changed from an efficiency standpoint the organizational outlook? How have I changed from using less resources to do more? How have I changed the organization from a quality perspective? These are very easy kind of non-conventional metrics for me to throw at you. What's more interesting is for you to take them and say, okay, let me go back into my organization and see maybe even in some approximation, how do I communicate this outside of traditional pillars of project management? So that's one concept that I wanted to leave with you. Most of the other things we have spoken about, organizational realities, I think sometimes this concept is overlooked, right? When an organization, we all have our ebbs and flows in our organization. When an organization is perhaps not doing so well, things such as the ancillary functions are looked at and keenly kind of evaluated for their benefit. So we, again, need to always go with the flow of the organization. Do not be extractive. Embed yourself. Weave yourself into the fabric, as I said when I started the presentation, so that as the organization flows and grows and shrinks, you yourself are doing the same thing. Because if you're not, then again, there's a disconnect. Very quick, I mean, most of those I think we've covered. Speak in corporate language, keep it simple, maintain deliberate leadership support and organizational support. Be cognizant of both the top and the bottom. How are you continuing that cycle? Lead by example, stakeholder experience, and make sure, as I just said, as I was concluding, that the PMO stays an organic part of the organization, not an ancillary. However small your piece of the pie is, take that pie within the organization. Take that space in the corner within the organization. It's much better to do that than to create a massive PMO that's sitting on the side that will never integrate and that the organization will never accept. Right? So if you have to start small in a corner of the organization, start small in a corner of the organization, but then grow with the organization and within the organization. So with that, I conclude the presentation. I think I went a little over. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but thank you very much for the opportunity.